All right, welcome everyone.
Yeah, I think you may have to.
Welcome commissioners and welcome members of the public. I want to start by welcoming our newest commissioner, Naila Popardon. Naila is a community organizer in South Sac, and she specializes and focuses on environmental justice and community development. And although this is her first meeting, she's actually been very engaged over the last couple of months and has participated in the Equity Roundtable and other calls. So thank you, and we're very glad you're here. Unfortunately, we have several commissioners absent today. Henry Lee is, I believe, traveling to China, so he's not here today. But I did want to congratulate him, even though he's not here, for his recent award for the 2019 Outstanding Public Transportation Award, which is a national award and really reflects all the good work that he and the team at SAC-RT do. Stephanie Bray and Trish Rodriguez were called away for other duties, as was Steve Hansen. He provided us with a statement, though, that I'll read later. And we just learned that Arlen Orchard couldn't be here today. Did I miss anyone who's absent? Everyone else is present and accounted for. And thank you to CalSTRS for again lending us their beautiful facility and the staff support. Today, our focus is on land use and mobility, two issues that are...
We're working on it. Is this one any better? Do you want
Yeah, let's switch. Thank you. I drank from that. Thanks. Today, our meeting is focused on land use and mobility, two issues that are critical and intertwined in reducing our GHG emissions. And as always, our discussion is in the context of the mandate that the commission has from the two mayors of Sac and West Sac to make high-level strategy priorities for reaching carbon zero by 2045. Recent studies since the last time that the commission met have had news that's not so great. They show that as a state, we're decades away and off from meeting the state's emission targets for 2030 and 2050. And we also have learned that transportation emissions are continuing to rise. On the positive side, we've seen a lot of action locally lately in California, especially around building electrification, and that's been nice to see. But clearer than ever is the need to accelerate the rate at which we're reducing GHG emissions, and we need to take bold action, especially around transportation, because that is the biggest problem. I'm glad that we're also talking about land use today because, of course, the strategies to reduce transportation emissions are reliant on managing our land use and growth in a way that supports the transition to a new culture around transportation. So our topics today are critical, they're urgent. Our work today is to review the recommendations from our expert committees on land use and on mobility and to take action on them. Before moving to the progress report from Kate, I wanted to just take a minute to update you on a couple of outreach efforts. And I want to start with youth engagement, which is a really important priority. And over the last weeks and months, we've really seen the engagement from the youth. The momentum is really increasing here in the region. We saw them at the climate strike in September. Local organizations like 350 and Sunrise have youth committees and subgroups. And we've had a lot of presence from the youth here at our meetings. And then I don't know how many of you were at the city council meeting in Sacramento last night, but I think there were about 15 youth who spoke to the council about the need for a declaration around a climate emergency, and they were very, very articulate and professional. Following the Sac State Summit that we had a couple of months ago, we had just last week a high school summit in West Sac, and that was spearheaded by Julia Burrows from Sacramento Mayor Steinberg's office. There were about 100 students there from 18 high schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 community colleges. And they were there to brainstorm literally hundreds of ideas around community actions and individual actions that people can take. Both the mayors, Steinberg and Cabaldon, were there, and Council Member and Commissioner Chris Ledesma was there, and Commissioners Ayala and Littman both attended. So thank you all. As we did with the SAC State Summit, we will compile all the input that we got and we'll present that to the commission. So I want to thank the River City High School for hosting. Rayleigh's, oh, Mike's not here yet, but we do think he's coming. Rayleigh's generously provided food for the event. And thank you, Chris Ledesma, who helped coordinate with West Sac and the high school there.
If I can?
Yes, Chris.
Hopefully my mic works. Thank you, Chair. And I just want to thank Julia and the staff for organizing the event. They're really spearheaded this for the last few months and working with the Washington Unified and River City High School. It was a terrific event. I think Alberto and Lori both were there. And just the engagement from the youth in our communities. And that was a really stunning part when the mayor did a little bit, Mayor Cabaldon did a little bit of a roll call. West Sac showed well, so thank you, kids in West Sac. But of course, Sacramento kids showed up. But we had kids from Placer County, from El Dorado County, from all around the region who came in for this. And just the enthusiasm, the passion of the kids. This is, we were very clear we were there to listen to them, and they showed up and had a lot to say. And so it reminds us all, should remind us all about what we're doing this for. And in addition to the messages around climate, there was really a good message. I thank Alberto and Commissioner Ayala for his remarks as well about the accountability that they need to learn. I think that was a message that we wanted to make sure we added in. I appreciate your leadership on that front, that hold us accountable for following up on this, because they have to live with this for their adult lives. So just want to thank everybody. It was a terrific event, and we committed that we would continue the conversation, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think all of us need to continue to think of ways to engage them and bring visibility to the youth. Welcome, Mike Teal. You snuck in disguise. I didn't recognize you.
Barely.
Thanks for being here. I don't know, I wanted to thank you for, and Rayleigh's for providing the food at the event in West Sac last weekend. Does any other commissioners who were at the high school event wanted to say anything? Okay, thanks. Okay, so going back to outreach, Mayor Steinberg's office, and Julia Burrows in particular, is also facilitating outreach with labor and business. So they've been meeting with pertinent labor representatives, including building and trades, on the recommendation, and that's an evolving activity, and we'll report back as it gets finalized. And also, they have launched a series of business roundtables working with the chambers in both SAC and West SAC. And the purpose of those is for us to share the recommendations, get their feedback, and identify opportunities. And I did have the chance to go to the first one that was held last week, and it was at the Metro Chamber office in Sacramento, and it was very, very productive and very positive, so that was heartening. So we'll report back to that as well. And a huge thank you to Julia Burrows for doing all that. And to Meg Arnold, who's also been helping with that effort. Thank you. And finally, I wanted to let the commission know we've obtained a tentative sponsor for the finance TAC, which is our 4th TAC. They're still working on their compliance checks, so I can't talk about it publicly yet, but I think they'll be a great sponsor. We're planning to have 3 meetings between December and February. We're still looking to finalize that list of people to be on that TAC. We want to keep it fairly small, 15 to 20, and really get the right experts from the region. So we're working on that, and we'll report back as that evolves also. Any questions before I turn it over to Kate? All right, thank you. Kate, progress report?
A lot of progress.
We have a lot
to
going
report.
on.
So at the last commission meeting, we had a lot of discussion around the built environment. strategies and decided to create a subcommittee that could explore the first strategy related to land use. So we had a group chaired by Alberto, thank you, Alberto, with a number of commissioners that were involved in that, and with a number of the land use technical advisory committee members as well. So we had a couple of calls with that group, and we were able to land on a revised strategy that will be presented today for both public comment and then for a vote as well. So we're hoping to finalize that last built environment strategy. We also had the TAC meetings for the mobility sector. So the mobility TAC met a number of times, and we will hear the recommendations from our co-chairs, Casey Lazan and Chris Flores, who will present the collective work of that technical advisory committee. And I want to just say that for all these TACs, it's a lot of work and a lot of commitment for the members who've been involved. So I would just want to thank everybody who have participated in those TACs, and we just want to be cognizant of all the hard work that went into the strategies that will be presented today. And we'll also take public comment on those mobility strategies, and we will vote on those strategies today as well. Moving on from this meeting, we've already had the Community Health and Resiliency TAC meet, and I saw our co-chairs in the back, Dan Wu and Kathleen Ave. Thanks so much to both of you for all your work on that TAC. So it looks like a number of key topics are arising out of that already, which will be presented at our next commission meeting. Those include urban greening and forestry, sustainable food systems and waste and resource management, and climate adaptation and resilience. So those are going to be the key topics, just a little sneak preview for what's going to be coming your way at the next commission meeting. For all of those, we have had an equity lens that is embedded within those conversations, both through the technical experts, and then also we'll be talking a little bit later about the equity roundtable that we've started as well, and how that group is filtering all the strategies through a social equity lens as well. So Helen, if you want to put the first slide up. So we've talked about our definition of carbon neutral for the purpose of this commission, and wanted to just give you an update on our working definition. This is the definition that the Technical Advisory Committee is using to think about their strategies. So we're looking at carbon zero as carbon neutral, so the net greenhouse gas emissions of each city equals zero. So that assumes that we're using greenhouse gas emissions based on international protocols, which specify that we're really looking at the inventories, including the emissions generated within the city boundaries. So no surprise, that's going to mean a lot of focus on the things that we've been talking about on buildings, transportation, energy supply, and waste. So just wanted to keep you guys current on how we're looking at what we mean when we say carbon neutral for the purpose of this commission. So looking at our overall timeline, as I noted, the Community Health and Resiliency TAC will be presenting at our December commission meeting, and then we'll do the two meetings as like we did with transportation, where they will present the initial strategies. We'll have a really robust dialogue. They'll go back and revisit anything that needs to be changed, and then present their final recommendations at the January meeting. We'll also have a couple of speakers at our next meeting who will talk about equity and community health. So we really want to dive into equity implications and how we should be framing those discussions, and how we should be thinking about implementation of the strategies as well. The finance TAC and business roundtables that Ann mentioned will be completed in February. So we'll have financing options and input from the business stakeholders for the commission meeting in March. So we're gearing up to shifting towards an implementation mindset, and want to make sure that financing is a big part of that conversation. I want to remind everybody, we've talked a lot about the need to integrate. So we know that you can't really deal with land use and the built environment separate from transportation, separate from community health and resiliency. So while we're holding these TACs separately, we will have all the TAC leads work at the end of the process to make sure that there aren't any gaps, and that we're properly integrating strategies across those sectors as well. We'll also, as a part of that, it's come up a number of times that it's not just the specific sectors or strategies, but there's structural recommendations that need to be made as well. And that relates to a lot of the feedback we've gotten and conversation around community engagement when we get to the implementation stage, some of the governance issues, the community education. So that's going to take place as we do that integration at the final stages of the process. Ultimately, we will be aiming to finalize and publish a report in May of 2020. And at that point, we will work with the cities to talk through the handoff and what that implementation will look like. In the meantime, we'll continue to work with both cities through their public engagement processes, and we're going to have a presentation about what the cities are doing today, so you get a chance to hear what's going on and how we're aligning. So that's it for now. I want to we're going to turn it over to talk to Jacque about the equity roundtables, but I wanted to thank Stephanie Bray, who unfortunately is not here, and April Wick for both of their engagement and really catalyzing the need to have that committee and really stepping up to be a part of that committee. So thank you to you both, and I will turn it over to Jacque, who is facilitating the equity roundtable.
Hi, Jacque.
Jacque Cole, I'd like to say thank you first and foremost to the commissioners for their leadership and commitment to specifically recognizing and including equity in this process. That was something that was expressed both from the community and from the commissioners, and so I appreciate that folks have taken out the time to actually put together a team to think a little bit more about that process. So as I said, Jacque Cole, Veritable Good. I was tasked with facilitating the conversation around this equity roundtable and the absence of community participation, which as a part of my role is trying to figure out how we can bridge that with some other opportunities that are going on and really using this space to identify what processes would be most effective for including communities in that work. And just so you know, for those of you that aren't aware, I'm also working with the city on their general plan implementation, specifically their environmental justice element. We've convened an environmental justice working group that I'm also facilitating. And so I'll speak a little bit later about how we'd like to bring both of those efforts together. And then spending some time out in the community, a part of the Breathe California Community Car Share program, so that we're bringing education to underserved populations about EV technology. Also working on the Stockton Boulevard Corridor study, trying to facilitate some opportunities to build some relationships outside of this particular process. And also working on the youth policy measures of success. So making sure that we're including youth in an equitable way and creating a process for that level of participation. So as was previously indicated, the impetus of the Equity Roundtable was specifically convened out of an expressed concern. And during that initial round of equity conversations, one of the things that was indicated was an absence of a robust level of participation. So they came back to the table and reached out to me to see what we could do to facilitate that process. And based on some input from community leaders, and in particular from Commissioners, Stephanie Bray and April Wick, we decided to create an equity roundtable that would meet throughout the duration of this effort. So not just to provide some comment, but to actually participate in the overall process and discussion. We have since established the new roundtable, which is comprised of a combination of equity advocates, topical experts, and community members. We've had 22 participating so far. And in addition to reviewing the TAC recommendations, the Equity Roundtable will also be providing a recommendation to the Commission specifically related to equity and community engagement in the cities for that implementation. Next slide. So one of the initial conversations that we were having is about what the definition of equity is. And it's a timely conversation because there are a number of different departments and organizations that are trying to figure out what that looks like for our communities. During our last meeting, we initiated the first iteration of that working definition to include equity as a means of making the decisions to ensure that fair and proportional distributions of impacts, opportunities, resources, and costs are shared. But we couldn't have that conversation without also talking about inclusivity. So we recognize that equity also demands the practice of including relevant stakeholders, in particular marginalized communities and groups that have historically been left out of the conversation and the decision-making process. And as I said, the EJ Working Group is currently working on a definition of equity. I know that the city of Sacramento's diversity manager is also working on a iteration of equity. So it's a timely conversation and something that we're trying to lean into. I look forward to sharing for the rest of the duration of this meeting. In fact, would it be troublesome if I sat at the end of the table over here?
That's fine, Jacque.
Okay, thank you.
But before you go, I'll see if there's any questions.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for your report, and thanks for stepping up to do this. It really meant a lot, and I think it's really helpful to have you, since you're also doing the work for the city. So thanks. I know you're a busy person. And I just want to say, I really like the definition, and I think it's really helpful to have a definition, because we keep talking about how we're viewing all this through an equity lens, and it's very helpful to have some language around that. Questions for Jacque from commissioners?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Before we move on, I should have mentioned at the beginning, as usual, about public comment. So the process is the same as usual. If you want, there are cards near the door, and you can give them to Helen if you, once you complete them. We will take public comment before we vote on the land use strategy, and then on that issue, and then we'll take public comment again before we vote on the mobility strategies. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll take any public comment on other matters. Thank you. Okay, our next item is to hear from West Sacramento. So a couple of meetings ago, the commission said they wanted to hear more from West Sac, and so that we can understand better how our process is relating to that of West Sacramento. So this is Dave Tilley, who's the principal planner and working on the climate action plan there. Thank you, Dave.
Yes, thank you for having me and having me speak today. I know we have a busy agenda, so I'll be brief. The last West Sacramento City Council meeting, which was just last Wednesday, our council approved our consultant contract to get going on our climate action plan, which I'm very excited about. It's been a long time in the making. I'm going to be building upon the work of our prior director, who put together our initial climate action plan years ago when these things were in their infancy. And so what I'm really excited about the timing of it now, because as this commission's recommendations are starting to gel, we'll be able to really catch that wave and build upon what has come out of this commission, not only in terms of the outreach, but the various recommendations that are starting to come out of the different TACs and are now starting to coalesce. We'll also be working with Ms. Cole on that, assisting with some of our outreach in our community as we get going on that. So we'll be crunching a lot of numbers, getting our baseline, following the international protocols in those sectors, and then identifying some reduction targets. And in the meantime, be working on some outreach, building upon what this commission has already done. So very excited about get going on this. It's a priority for our council this year, and it's a part of our general plan, and we can't wait to get going on it. So that's our good news update for today.
Thanks, Dave. Questions? I just have one for you, which is, you might not know yet, but do you have a sense of when you'll start your outreach activities?
I expect to start that right after the first of the year. We're getting a little late in this year to be able to do that in a robust manner. So we'll be starting a lot of the technical work in the meantime, and then try to work on that, early next year, and then proceed to wrap it all up toward the end of next year.
Great, thank you. Okay, thanks for being here and for your work.
Sure.
Next is an update from Sacramento City on their outreach activities, and this is Matt Hertel, one of the planners.
Yes, good evening,
Matt.
Commissioners. Matt Hertel, Senior Planner, City of Sacramento's Long Range Planning Division. As you are aware, we are in the midst of our 2040 General Plan update. The general plan update also includes the city's 10 community plans, as well as a standalone climate action plan. I'm here this evening to provide a brief update on the general plan, community plan outreach conducted to date, and talk about next steps. Oh, magic, that was magic. All right. How did you know? Is this a little clicker here? Okay. Let's see. Perfect. All right, so since the time of our previous outreach update to you on August 1st, we've been busy, and we completed phase 1 of the general plan outreach and conducted 6 additional community plan area workshops. 7 meeting in a box resident initiated events, 5 pop-up outreach events in underserved communities, and our youth ambassadors for climate change from La Familia, Asian Resources, and Green Tech were busy creating an educational video, interviewing regional leaders, including the mayor, and developing an online questionnaire for their peers to gain an understanding of the potential strategies to address climate change. They received 309 responses, which is really awesome. And the phase 1 is really focused on understanding the community's issues and opportunities that should be addressed in updating the general plan, the community plans, and the climate action plan. The summaries of the input that we received on all this outreach will be posted to the project website, sac2040gpu.org, in the next week or so. So you see lots of great information that's going to inform the next phase of the project. Okay. I was hoping it magically happened again, but no. All right. So the general plan divides the city into 10 community plan areas, as shown on this slide. And we held interactive workshops in each of the 10 plan areas. We even did 4 in 1 week, I think, which was a little bit obscene. And we did that between June and August. Community members got to mark up maps and respond to a series of questions, such as community assets to build on, things to change, things that are missing in the communities, barriers to getting around, vision for the future, etc. Our team is currently producing a summary of each of the workshops, and we'll be getting that to the website in the next couple of weeks. Input received at these workshops will lay the foundation for the development of the draft plans, and they'll be localized and unique to each of the community plan areas. So this slide provides a high-level summary, very high level, of the issues and opportunities identified during phase 1 of community outreach. But some of the key takeaways to climate change include residents wanting greater transit, bike, and pedestrian connectivity, many community members not feeling safe riding their bikes in all areas of the city, and also not feeling there's adequate transit connections throughout into all areas of the city. There's also an expressed urgency to respond to climate change, and a need for greater diversity of housing supply, including denser and more affordable options for all walks of life, for people from all walks of life, including seniors. So, next steps. Phase 1 of the 2040 General Plan update concludes with the City Council adoption of the vision and guiding principles on November 5th. And in the next phase, we'll be exploring different options and alternatives that respond to the vision and guiding principles adopted by Council and the issues and opportunities identified in the phase 1 outreach. We'll be kicking off phase 2 in February with another round of citywide workshops to gain input on the options and alternatives to develop draft policies to be included in the draft general plan. Phase 2 outreach will also include community review of draft climate action plan measures. And the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change TAC recommendations will be reviewed and considered and folded into the options and alternatives in the draft CAP measures. So the timing works well. We'll continue to implement the outreach program, and in March and April, we'll be hosting workshops again in each of the 10 community plan areas for input on the draft plans. So we anticipate that the draft general plan will be available for review and comment along with the community plans and climate action plan early 2021. And we're wrapping it up closer to mid 2021. So that includes my updates. I'm available to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah. Alberto.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
You pointed to this, but I wanted to drill in a little bit more in terms of, can Kate talked about the timing for some of the activities that we still need to conduct, getting to integration of all the recommendations, and then transitioning to some discussion about implementation. How do you see, or what can we do as a commission, and maybe even our respective agencies that some of us represent? What do we do to make sure that some of the things that we are going to be committing to can be aligned and folded into something like your climate action plan, for example? How do we make that happen?
Well, we've been coordinating behind the scenes quite a bit. We've had staff at each of these meetings and the TAC meetings and being involved in that. We have a staff member involved in the TACs. So we're exchanging ideas. We're taking that input that is coming out of these meetings in TAC. We're making sure that our consultants are aware of that, and making sure that as we develop draft measures, we're also incorporating the recommendations from the commission and the TAC. So we feel like there's good coordination going on, and timing works pretty well.
Just, are you asking more broadly, like beyond the commission, like to your agency and others? Or?
Yeah, so, and he addressed it. I think there
Okay.
is general sensitivity that we need to work together to make sure that we get this alignment. Something that I've been very interested in is, again, taking us as an agency. I think there's a lot that we can do with some of the things that we're going to be committing to in the context of the commission to translate it into our work. But obviously, a lot of it is focusing on climate action plans at the city and even at the county. So that's the reason for asking. So I think we just need to be cognizant that there's a lot that we can do to continue to coordinate and integrate these commitments.
Absolutely.
Okay, great point. Yeah, Jacque. Mm-hmm.
So initially during phase one, a lot of what we were doing was just about education. And as you know, we hosted the Doing EJ workshop in July of this year, which was an opportunity to introduce agencies to each other so we can initiate some of that collaborative process. In the Environmental Justice Working Group, we have participation from quite a number of folks. The Air Quality Management District is participating in that space as well. My position in most of this is to try to facilitate that coordination as much as possible. And where the Mayor's Climate Commission is concerned, I would like to use the opportunity for our phase 2 outreach out in the community to introduce a lot of the recommendations that have been developed out of this process.
Great. And just, I think your points are really important. One, and maybe it's working perfectly. I don't know. But possibly that's something that when the TACs do their integration work, that they could look at in case there's something we should recommend. Okay, any other questions? Yes, James.
Matt, thanks for the presentation, the update. I'm happy to know, as sort of a planner, that we're syncing up here in terms of the commission recommendations, the general plan updates. And this may not be a question that you can answer. It may be a question for my fellow commissioners. If we think of a plan like a New Year's resolution, then we have to change our behavior after we adopt the resolution, right? And I'm a little worried that, again, as a planner and loving what we're doing and the general plan, I heard lots of great things in terms of engagement and everything else, but we need to change our behavior. And so the focus on implementation and what the first year, 12 months after the commission makes its recommendations, I understand we're recommending the 2 cities. What I'd hate to have is just sort of an elongated planning exercise, right? Rather than how do we know we're changing? How do we know things are working? What are we testing? What are we doing? So I don't know that's really a question for you. I'm mindful of this not getting stretched out for a really long time in plans. As a planner, I say that. It's hard to say that.
For the applause. I think that's really important. One thing, and then I'll see if others have comments, that some have raised and I've thought about, is whether this commission could present in some way some of its recommendations and point out that they can be implemented before the climate action plan or general plans are adopted. One example of that is the ordinance around building electrification. So I think something to think about. Kate?
We're also seeing the financing committee being a really important part of that because we know implementation is going to be wedded with having an ability to pay for it. So that's why we want to move on the financing piece before we even make the recommendations.
Okay, others? So quiet today. Okay, thanks, Matt. All right, that brings us to first the land use strategy and then the mobility strategies. Just two things.
Are we gonna do the criminal justice working?
Oh, I forgot. Okay, sorry. I jumped ahead. Jackie, that's why you stayed up here. Sorry. Okay, Jackie is going to now present, kind of with her other hat, on the Environmental Justice Working Group from Sacramento City. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And as previously stated, what we're trying to do at a high level is to figure out how to be collaborative in this process. So we specifically invited a number of different folks from different agencies to participate in this space. This is going to be a comprehensive effort, and so we're going to need a comprehensive strategy. In terms of updates, we recently, for our last EJ working group meeting, did a revision of the city's vision and guiding principles. It's my understanding that that was the most robust conversation about that revision. So folks were able to incorporate an equity lens into those recommendations. We have convened our first round of focus groups, so focusing in particular on food access and transportation, all of the buckets that are included in the environmental justice element. We'll be conducting a second round of focus groups coming up this month, Remy? Next month, just kidding. We are also, for our November convening, going to be digging into the climate action plan. We are in the middle of deciding how we want that participation to look like. In terms of engagement, like I said, most of phase one was primarily about education and making sure that the decision makers who will be responsible for receiving this information are equipped to receive it. So for phase two, we'd like to focus on more of a grassroots effort and really digging into building up the capacity of community members to participate in this discussion. One of the most successful methods that we use was a community listening session model. And I would say that the one that we did in North Sacramento was the most robust and identified not just the priorities of that community, but highlighted a number of issues on process that haven't been implemented yet. So for the second round of phase two, I think we'd like to conduct more listening sessions and figuring out how we can actually give capacity to community members to participate. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Jackie. Questions, comments? Yes, Alberto.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm going to tee up a subject that I know you know full well, and I'm going to take advantage of the commission's work to try to piggyback perhaps an opportunity for additional collaboration. And where I'm going with this is community air protection, AB 617. As many of you know, this is a groundbreaking way of thinking about protection against air pollution. It is indeed a paradigm shift. And one of the concerns that we see working in the community, and again, you know this full well, is all of us are out there trying to reach the community, and it's the same community members. So quickly, we're going to start to overwhelm people. So I guess this is just a plea, and I would invite your comments, your thoughts on this. To the extent that there are any opportunities for us to sort of integrate and collaborate, and so that we don't, end up repeating meetings and things of that nature. Certainly from 617 perspective, there's a lot of benefit that we can bring to a community. And I would imagine that if we do this right, there's going to be some really important leveraging opportunities for some of the other things that, general plans and climate action plans are trying to accomplish. So maybe let's just keep that in mind. And I don't know to what extent, maybe that's a future area of implementation for the commission to make sure that we don't miss this opportunity.
Absolutely. And I mean, the collaboration is something I never stop thinking about. We're not going to get to a solution if our agencies aren't communicating effectively with each other. I've been keeping an eye on the 617 conversation, but haven't had the capacity to dig into it specifically on my own. I would be very interested in continuing a conversation with you about what that might look like. I agree that it's definitely an opportunity that we need to take advantage of, but there's been a little bit of miscommunication about how that fits into the rest of the work that's going on. So clarity would be lovely.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thanks, Jacque. Okay, now we'll move to our, the recommendations on land use and mobility. Just before we start, I want to remind everybody, commissioners and public, that what the commissioners and what the commission is voting on are the top-level strategies and not the underlying tactics. And the tactics are very important because they really, thinking about it in that way really brings the strategies to life, and it's a very crucial body of work. But what the commission's actually voting on is that top-level strategies. And then, before we start, I thought this would be a good time to read the statement from Councilmember Steve Hansen and Commissioner. So Steve asked us to relay that he supports both the land use strategy and the mobility recommendations. That transportation is the most critical sector, and these ambitious strategies will not only help us get to carbon zero, but will also increase mobility, access, and choice. So strong support for the recommendations, even though he's not here. Okay, so with that, we'll turn to the land use strategy. I want to thank Alberto and everyone on the commission who worked on it. A subcommittee was formed to revisit the recommendation on land use. So thank you, and thank you, Kate, as well. I know you spent a lot of time on that. It's a critical foundation for meeting our goals, and I think that's what we've kind of learned through this process, how important this recommendation truly is. So, Alberto, I will turn it to you to present the language that the subcommittee agreed upon.
Okay,
you.
well, thank you. Let me, can we go back to the previous slide? Thank you. Let me remind the commission and those of you here why we ended up doing this. So you may recall that a few commission meetings ago, we actually voted on language that made a commitment from the land use tag. And I think there was wide agreement that we needed to revisit not only the process, but maybe the way the language was structured and eventually voted on. So the commission formed a subcommittee. And what I wanted to do here, it was important for me to share with you, to show you the participants in that conversation. I think it's important to recognize that we had multiple voices, multiple perspectives, weighing in and sharing ideas and really driving the process. And I think that is very important, because what you will see is indicative of the many perspectives that you see on the screen. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So what we wanted to do was two things. I think as Kate mentioned initially, we had a number of good conversations, very open and honest participation from the subcommittee members. And we wanted to do two things, and I'm hoping that you can see this reflected in the commitment and the way that the language ended up being drafted. One is we did want to make a reference to a broad overarching strategy that talks about this vision for the region, and specifically tying it to the state's sustainable community strategy commitment. For those of us working at the state level, like SACOG, like us, that has specific meaning that is important to retain. And that was one of the things that we were interested in, because having the commitment from the commission have a nexus to state policy that is clearly dictating the future of land use and mobility for our region and the state is important. But one of the other things that was also relevant that we heard from some of those, and many of you are in the audience, thank you for your participation, from those of you participating in the committee, was that we also needed to have a very direct and tangible tie in to even the project level decisions that many of us are going to be making going forward to try to implement this commitment. And that's what I think, have been able to accomplish by bringing in a direct and concrete reference to a VMT cap in future projects. So my hope is that you in the audience and the commission sees the benefit of the revised language in terms of how we've been able to converge on language and a commitment that really carries the spirit of what we initially voted on and then some. And I think it improves on many of the areas that the subcommittee identify as priorities. So with that, I'm not going to read the statement. You have it there. In the future, as we talk about integration and implementation, we'll be diving into some of the tactics and implementation ideas. But for now, I think unless the commission has any questions about the process or how we got here, I certainly want to invite Councilmember Ledesma, who was involved in the subcommittee. Councilmember Hansen was also involved, but unfortunately he's not here with us, or anybody else that wants to weigh in. I know Commissioner Arnold was also involved in the I think I just wanted to
almost
make a
gave me-
political appointment
You
here.
did, yeah.
You were involved in the process if you
What
want to add
city?
anything. But like I said, I think at this point in time, we're open for deliberation, discussion, and then a motion on the language.
Thank you so much. I think we have a couple of public comments. So what I'd like to do is kind of follow our normal process. Any clarifying questions about the language? We'll hear the public comment, and then we can hear from commissioners. And we also will hear from Jacque because the Equity Roundtable reviewed the language. Okay, do you want to go ahead, Jacque, and do that? Okay.
So we were provided the opportunity to take a look at the recommendations that came out of the land use TAC. And what we basically were able to identify were just some tweaks to language. So the first was making sure that we include anti-displacement rather than minimizing displacement. It's a robust conversation that's going on right now about what that means to implement anti-displacement measures. And then it was also expressed that we should be including small businesses or extending the anti-displacement implementation to small businesses in addition to residents. So making sure that we're able to preserve the businesses in the communities.
Jacque, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify for everybody that maybe it's obvious. She's talking about the underlying tactics and not the language so far, at least of the strategy itself.
Right, sorry.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So the next was making sure that we're promoting accessibility and universal design. Also making a commitment to affordable workforce housing, creating living wage jobs, not just new jobs. And that was specifically a conversation that was expressed specifically about paying attention to what it means to have a good quality of life. So re-examining what it is to have a living wage. And then we just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of the fact that these recommendations were included in the updated tactics and strategies.
Thanks, Jacque. Okay, clarifying questions on the strategy from commissioners, and then we'll go to public comment. Given the number of people on the committee, I'm not anticipating a lot of clarifications needed. Okay, we have Kayam, sorry, didn't see you there.
Just if someone could talk a little bit more about project level VMT and just like the types of projects, the size, those things.
Great.
Roberta, do you want to? Yeah, you're right.
So I'm not going to give you the specifics, but the thinking behind it is, again, that this can be something that is applicable and tangible at the project level. So in the future, and again, I think this is a good example of how important it is to make the connection to those of you out there that are working on general plans, climate action plans, those of us on the commission that have a say in this. a lot of the discussion was really centered in terms of should it be a regional average, should it be a city average, what have you. But the thinking here is, again, that future development, this is a sort of thing that we would commit to.
So on that, you're saying that project level as a term has not been defined, or is that just looking for more of a general term?
I think the way we anticipate it, and if anybody else has an idea, you're welcome to weigh in. I think the way we were anticipating this to be is any development project that comes through the cities, this would be a commitment that you would attempt to implement.
Right.
That was my understanding as well, what that meant.
Okay, good clarification, thank you. Yeah,
I apologize, I have really bad memory, but when we approved this language last time, did we have the term mandate all electric construction in new construction? Or has that changed?
You're looking back at the land use strategies?
Yeah, sorry.
at the
Which-
tactics, maybe.
I think that was 3.
Can you show us where you're,
I don't, it was always there.
you're looking at this one?
Okay. Yes,
Yeah, this is the exact language that was approved at that meeting.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, good. Okay, we've got 2 requests to speak. First is Dave Mogavero. And Dave, thank you for being part of this process, and thank you for pushing us on this.
You want me here or there? Does it matter?
You're fine there. Or as long as someone turns it on. Oh, come on up, that's fine.
That's why I don't have to figure any buttons out. Good afternoon, everyone.
You're still not on. I think you have to push it. There you go. You turned it on.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the commission for taking this issue as seriously as it deserves. And I want to thank you for reconvening the group so that we can have a good dialogue about it. And I want to thank Alberto for doing a great job and Kate for doing a good job of managing the process. So you have in front of you the strategy, and it's a good one. I want to reinforce that this is a strategy that the 2 cities are dominantly doing anyway. Most of the development that would take place in the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento will comply with this, maybe with some exceptions, the south area of West Sac and the Natomas area of Sacramento. I'm going to read tactic number 1 because that, in my opinion, is the crux of the issue for the implementation. I may be violating protocol a little bit, so excuse me. But introduce and advocate for state, regional, and local regulation that clearly limits new development to existing developed areas in the region. And without the participation of Elk Grove and Rancho Cordova and Folsom and the county, most notoriously, in the process of doing a better job with land use in our region, we are sort of not being very effective at dealing with the land use issues. So I want to thank you for including this tactic. I beseech you to take tactic number 1 very, very seriously. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Karen Jacque, I saw you, and now I don't see, oh, there you are, okay. Thanks, and if you
Good
could
afternoon.
identify your organization as well, please.
Well, I'm partly, on this one, I'm speaking for myself,
Okay,
except
thank you.
for one comment. First, I wanted to say I'm really happy to see all of the electrification and new buildings by 2023, but I would like to see incentives to get all electric plans in even sooner than that. I'm looking at the deluge of plans going in the central city now, and when I've asked a couple of developers whether they plan to make that all electric, they're like, oh, we're thinking about it, but we may just do gas. And so I'm concerned about, as we work on this, if there's any way to incentivize to get it to at least 2022 instead of 23, and to incentivize people in some way to go all electric sooner. a couple of other comments that I wanted to make is having tactics for addressing gentrification is going to be critical, because I'm watching I live in the central city, and I have for years, and I'm watching all the housing go in. And it's great to have the density, and a small bit of it is low income, but I'm seeing the workers that I know in the community moving out to the suburbs, not having adequate transit and driving in. So that's got to be really considered. And last, on behalf of Trees for Sacramento, it's critical that design looks at ways to preserve and add trees, even though we get more density, because we are losing trees to construction in a huge amount. So we're gaining in one way and losing in another. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Whoa. PG&E is, no. Yeah. Did anyone else want to make a public comment on the land use strategy? Okay, great. Then I think now would be a great time if someone wanted to make a motion.
If I may, if I can make a couple of quick statements and
sure.
around it, because I just want to thank Alberto and Kate for both of your leadership in getting through this initiative, and all David and everybody else that worked on the TAC to get here. It was participating in a couple of calls, and I really appreciated the conversation, because it really did give us an opportunity to recognize sort of the policies and efforts that are being made by both cities, and kind of where we were, and understanding of both of our challenges and what we still aspire to do. And I think the part that I received most about this was the need, that was just understanding that the work that both these cities are doing as a region and leading the way growth will go for the next 30 to 50 years. That's an important part of what we do, but it's still not enough. And the part that I want the public to understand is, and I've talked to our staff about it, is the project level kicker on this strategy is one that was going to challenge us in some ways. But I think in kind of thinking about it at a development project, David, you brought up the south area of our city, where a lot of growth has been planned. And I think that's an area where we will need to really think about this effort, and how do we, which is plan for more suburban type growth, how do we plan to hit this VMT number? It's going to take a different kind of thinking, something we're not used to. And it's something that the council, as this comes back to us, and I hear you very clearly, James, around implementation of this. How do we effectuate or implement this kind of strategy in a Southport framework plan that's been in place for 30 years? And how do we change that sort of thinking because of this new dynamic? So I think it's challenging still to us. And we recognize, at least I do on behalf of the commission and here, I want the public to recognize this is something that's really going to challenge us, but that should be what we're after. And that was what we anticipated. I knew we were not going to get out of this without some level of challenge on land use. So again, I welcome it. It's going to be, we're going to have lots of questions. I know our planning staff, David, is over there. This is really going to challenge us, but so be it. We know what we need to do. We've, as a city, have put a lot of effort into putting the right infrastructure in place to get the rest of the strategy in place, but this is one we're going to have to work on. So unless, I don't know if anybody else had a comment, but I was going to make that as a support for the strategy and a motion.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
A second.
Great.
Question.
Can I just,
Okay, we'll have discussion. Questions?
I don't know if my mic is working.
You press the screen.
It says
It's green.
green, but
We can hear you.
We can
I
hear you,
just
yeah.
wanted to speak from a regional perspective and thank Dave for his comment, because I greatly appreciate it. I think it is going to take a lot of public outcry and bold strategies like these to help other communities within the region realize the importance of growing within their boundaries. So I think that kudos to us for putting this out there.
Thank you. Okay, other discussion on the motion? James?
So first of all, Alberto and Kate and everybody else who was engaged, including David and lots of you out there, I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I think it was the right thing to do, even though I made that motion back in the summer. But I'm glad to see that the Sustainable Community Strategy is a big part of it. I'm going to support this. I'm going to vote for it. But I just want to say, I think as I was trying to articulate at the commission meeting in June, I have a difference of opinion on the first tactic. Not that we want sprawl, we don't want that, right? But I think the question before us as a region is, we have faster population growth in the state of California and faster population growth in the US. Is there a way that we can add new growth areas, smart, sustainable, low VMT? I know that's not a debate we want to have right now, but if the implementation on this, if that's the tactic that comes back to the regional level, that will come back in our lap as the regional agency. And I can tell you that's not where our regional plan is. And our regional plan still gets to 19% GHG reduction. So that said, it gets back to my implementation question earlier, because Chris, as you were saying, this is really, this is going to require a big change in behavior, and I'm concerned about the emphasis on implementation. And I would say that the tactics 2 and 3 are just critical, because regardless, not that it's not important about where we draw the line, what happens inside the line in terms of land use and growth and affordable housing and accessible, that is what's so critical. And we're in a position in this region where we're not getting the stuff inside maybe a little bit in Midtown and here in West Sac, but as a region, we're not getting the development we need, the accessible, affordable development we need inside the current line as it stands. And that's a huge problem, and it's going to take a lot for us to work on that as a region. So anyway, I appreciate David, as you know, I appreciate where you're coming from and the comments you're making, and I absolutely, we would choke on sprawl if we get that. So I'm going to support this, and we'll again, I think, really have to figure out implementation and prioritization.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, then. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Or raise, how about raising your hand? I guess it's hard to hear here. Okay, opposed or abstain? So the motion unanimously carried. Great, so our land use strategy will move forward for inclusion in the Commission's recommendation report. And just to be clear, that final report will come back here for a vote at the end of the process. Thank you again, Alberto and Kate and everyone involved. And it was, I think the idea, and I think it might have been your idea, Alberto, but to have this subcommittee of the commission, I think it worked really nicely to bring people together around an issue and really have people's voices heard and get that collaboration. So maybe there'll be another opportunity for that going forward. Okay, the next item then is to hear the mobility recommendations from Casey Lazan and Chris Flores.
Good evening. Thank you, commissioners, for your leadership on this mission to get to carbon zero and for pushing the mobility TAC to be ambitious. We hope as we give you the overview of the 3 strategies out of that TAC that you will agree that this is an ambitious proposal that we hope will be achievable. So again, Casey Lazan with SACOG.
Chris Flores with Sacramento Regional Transit.
Since our last, we were last here, there were 2 more mobility TAC meetings. Several commissioners were engaged in those 2 meetings. Thank you so much for your leadership and engagement in those TAC meetings. And we want to thank the TAC members. It truly was hard work and commitment on their part. And also thank you to LGC staff who kept us moving forward to this point. It was a challenging task, but the TAC collaborated to ultimately reach consensus on the strategies that you have before you today, and we are excited to present their recommendations.
Thank you. And again, I'm Chris with Sacramento Regional Transit. I do want to just start off by saying I know Henry, Commissioner Lee apologizes he couldn't be here today. But I did have a chance to review all of the strategies and tactics with him. And he has given his blessing and supports these recommendations. Thinks it strikes the right balance that we're trying to achieve here of being ambitious, but also understanding the realities. I just want to also echo what Casey said and thank the commissioners, the TAC members. This is really an urgent matter that we need to address, and I think the commitment from everybody here has been amazing. We know climate change is real, and it's here today. I mean, as I speak, thousands of Northern Californians are without power because of the fear of wildfires and causing wildfires from the wind and electricity. So this is a problem that we have to grapple with today. So, I forgot to change the slide. So as you can see, I think this is a refresher from last time. Transportation sector, especially in California, dominates the greenhouse gas emissions. It's over 50% of the emissions, the total emissions, the largest source for cities. As a region, there is some positive news. We're doing a little bit better. Transportation emissions per person has dropped about 15% since 1990. But overall, the emissions from the sector has risen 29%. So we still have a lot of work to do, obviously. We recognize that 2045, it's going to be a heavy lift to kind of get to carbon zero. So we have, we're trying, hopefully some of our proposals that we put forth today are that audacious and get us there. And we'll reap many of those benefits of public health and equity. So what we need to do and what you'll see in our presentation is that we need to change development patterns in our region. We need to facilitate a broader cultural shift. We need to uplift equitable and innovative solutions. We need to collaborate with community members across all agencies, public and private, to achieve our goals. And we need to ensure that we're providing mobility solutions that work for all community members and all residents. And we recognize that transportation sector is a dynamic sector. There's currently a lot of things changing, so we can't necessarily predict the future, but we try to kind of strike that nice balance of what we're living in today with how can we shift some of the behavior as we move forward.
I want to recap some of the three lenses that the mobility TAC looked through in designing the strategies that are before you. It's really to ensure that you know the issues that were discussed, the principles that came out of that, and the intention behind these strategies. So the TAC looked through the lenses of equity, innovation, and then the carbon zero goal. Through the lens of equity, there were kind of three key principles or issues that were discussed. That most of our communities are built for driving, but not everyone has access to or can use a car. So this is an existing inequity that the TAC was trying to address in developing the strategies and the tactics that support that. Second, that we need to prioritize the most underserved and underrepresented members of our community, communities of color, low-income people, people with disabilities, and those who have been historically marginalized. And third, by working to create a future that works for our most vulnerable and under-resourced communities, we create a future that works for all. So with that summary in mind, the question that we came back to over the course of our discussions was, are we prioritizing under-resourced communities while avoiding unintended consequences? And those were the questions that we asked as we went through the development of the tactics for the strategies. On the topic of innovation in that lens, we wanted to leverage this as an opportunity to make our region a hub for innovation in this dynamic and quickly evolving sector. We also have an opportunity to advance innovative solutions in a way that creates local jobs, that supports workforce development and transition, and invests in existing communities. And so the key question that we asked, looking through that lens of innovation as we developed these tactics, was, is this tactic, and is the collection of these tactics advancing innovation in policy and technology? And then through the lens of carbon zero, we thought to meet our mandate, we focus on strategies and tactics that can achieve deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And this includes actions to support a broader cultural shift that's needed: education, equitable outreach and engagement, creative incentives, subsidies, and strategies. So the key question there when looking through the lens of carbon zero was, will this facilitate mode shift and achieve deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. We want to thank also the Equity Roundtable for reviewing and improving our recommendations. There was a lot of very valuable input that sometimes was a word or so, but it was very valuable to getting the recommendations that you have before you today. So.
Thank you. So I just want to go over a little bit of the TAC process and the thought process as we were coming up with the 3 strategies and the underlying tactics. As you'll see in our recommendations, we kind of have a loading order or a modal hierarchy, if you will, that we're trying to really get people out of the change behavior to get people out of their single occupancy internal combustion engine automobiles. In order to create a sustainable multimodal transportation system, we really need to prioritize active transportation, transit and shared mobility, and then focus on electrifying what is left over. So our goal really, as our thought process, was to move those trips of the single occupancy vehicle trips to encourage active transportation on those shorter trips. And for the longer trips, can we focus on transit and making sure that people are utilizing transit to get there and then transition the rest. We know the modal hierarchy is important to keep in mind as we move away from a car-centric approach and provide for more sustainable, accessible, affordable options for mobility while creating walkable, healthy, and vibrant, sustainable communities. Knowing that this is going to take a dramatic change in kind of the behavior, we need to find the right balance of incentives and disincentives to kind of get us there. We know as people, like, they want to feel safe, they want to feel like they have protected lanes, so we're going to have to invest in infrastructure. Same goes with transit. They need it to be reliable, they need it to be frequent, so we're going to be focusing on those in our tactics. So just a little bit of the structure for each of the strategies, and then we'll get into the strategies. For each strategy, we identified 2030 and 2045 targets with the ultimate goal of getting carbon zero in mind, with with setting interim targets to get us there. We established mode shift targets for active transportation, transit, and shared mobility as a way to highlight the TAC's intended modal hierarchy. And then for all recommendations, early and ongoing outreach, engagement, and education is going to be critical.
Okay. We're going to give you an overview of each of the tactics of each of the strategies. And as a reminder, so 1, you told the mobility TAC to be ambitious, and 2, you said that we could have 3 to 100 tactics. Yes. So it's something more like maybe a little less than 10 per. So we're not going to go through all of those, but we will be highlighting the themes of those tactics as we talk about each strategy. So this first one is the active transportation strategy. So this is focused on infrastructure, and it recognizes the importance of land use and neighborhood design to create walkable and rollable neighborhoods. It's focused on low-stressed infrastructure to align with Vision Zero efforts. And the goal is that when you're walking or rolling down the street, that you feel safe, that it's convenient, that it's the natural thing to do. So the mode share targets, from a baseline mode share of between 10 and 14% between the 2 cities, we have a 30% mode share target for 2030 and a 40% mode share target for 2045. Some additional context and framing for this strategy. The TAC felt the need to accelerate existing efforts to expand active transportation corridors, to conduct robust outreach and education to encourage mode shift and create compact neighborhoods with daily needs within walking and rolling distance to help us to achieve these targets. This is not intended to be part of or in any way support a monolithic landscape of high-rises, but diverse housing types and compact neighborhoods. What's in common with all of them is that you can get to your needs, your daily needs, by walking or rolling. And then the TAC also wanted to leverage the momentum we're building to invest in historically marginalized communities and address broader concerns and need around safety and livability, again, engaging with the Vision Zero efforts that are occurring. To give you a summary of the tactics, there were kind of 3 categories of these. One is to prioritize pedestrian travel at the top of the modal hierarchy, as we said earlier, with updated design guidelines and street design standards, establishing car-free districts, implementing low carbon cargo zones, second category about improving active transportation infrastructure is conducting neighborhood-level audits to identify and address deficient infrastructure, prioritizing high-injury portions of the network, develop and implement a green connection strategy, improve sidewalks, add bike lanes, and other amenities like drinking fountains to make active transportation more attractive, and then to encourage and facilitate mode shift by a combination of incentives, subsidies, and in some cases, disincentives. And this is a theme that's going to go throughout the three strategies. So why active transportation is important and why do we have it as the first strategy here? And that's because whether you're traveling a block or you're traveling 10 miles, the first and last part of that trip is walking or rolling. And if we can have an environment and an infrastructure in place that actually makes it feel natural and safe to do, then you might be able to do that for even more trips or for even longer than, say, that block or that one little bit to your next mode of travel.
Great. And we'll move on to the transit and shared mobility strategy. This strategy, the language for this strategy remains unchanged since the last commission meeting, and it's up on the screen for your review. The strategies that we were thinking of is expand and improve transit and shared mobility services, more routes, connect more services to go more places people want to be, job centers, improve user experience, and of course, make transit shared and pooled and more accessible, affordable, timely, and attractive than single occupancy vehicles. So if we can build up the sustainable modes to drive a cultural shift is away from those single occupancy internal combustion vehicles. And so this includes the need to speed up travel time, frequencies, ensure that the public feels safe when they're riding. It's always an important experience. So just kind of a reminder of where we are and what we've set for targets. Currently, the baseline is about 4% or so of transit trips taken, and we don't have great data currently on shared mobility, but we believe that's a sector that's definitely going to be rising in the future with the innovations. The TAC came up with a 2030 target of 30%. For transit and shared mobility, and then by 2045, 50%. And like Casey said, there's a lot of integration with the first strategy, as everybody needs to, if you're taking a transit trip, they're gonna start either walking or rolling. So just a little bit additional context in framing for this, transit needs to be at the center of a sustainable multimodal network. We need to figure out ways to address congestion and move high volume of people into small geographical areas. A lot of innovations in shared mobility as a service or MaaS that we can leverage, and we'll likely see new models of services coming online in future decades. We do know autonomous vehicles will be coming in the future, and we need to ensure these vehicles are electric and utilized for pool rides. Otherwise, we may have zero occupancy vehicles floating around our cities. And then there's a lot of synergistic opportunities with the built environment strategies focused on infill development, TOD. So mobility in our built environment will always be intrinsically linked, and so we have to foster that collaboration as we move forward. So a little bit on the tactics. I'll share with you some of the tactics, and I know they're in your report as well, the full list of 10. One of them is adopt a transit first priority on arterial corridors and new highway expansions. Far too often we kind of develop with just the car in mind, automobile in mind, without thinking about other modes of transportation. So can we direct funding and capacity building proportionally to achieve the mode shift targets we're targeting here or creating here? Eliminate that minimum need for parking requirements when it's appropriate. All too often, our transportation network is really focused on the automobile. And then integrate transit and shared options. So we need to look at piloting mobility hubs, especially in underserved communities, to showcase the various solutions, the first last mile solutions. I know at SAC-RT, we've partnered to locate jump bikes at our stations, and it's been a very good success, and we're seeing people use it to get to that first last mile destination. And then we need to increase accessibility and affordability throughout our mobility sector. So that may be discounted passes in the future for low-income riders. I know SAC-RT's piloted a program we hope to make permanent, but free rides for students for a year. And we've already seen about a 40% increase in student ridership since we've launched that program. So hopefully we can continue some of those programs. We need alternative integrated methods for payment. We need to make it easier for people. We need to encourage employers to create incentive programs to help people ride. And a lot of this is providing more choices for the public, right? So that they don't feel like they need it. They can leave their car at home, they feel empowered, and they know they have a mobility option to get around. So I know these are kind of bold and audacious recommendations, but we know we have to invest now and make these if we're ever going to reach our target.
Okay, and our third strategy on zero emission vehicles. Third in loading order, maybe boldest, as the TAC worked a lot to try to make this something that was bold and something that could be achievable. So this strategy is to develop a comprehensive package of incentives, disincentives, and policies to move cities away from polluting vehicles, to create a robust network of public charging infrastructure, and to drive down the cost of those vehicles. The strategy needs to be considered as within the broader vision of reducing the need for personal vehicle ownership and single occupancy vehicle trips. Ultimately, we want fewer people driving or needing to drive cars. So the mode share target here, it's starting from a baseline of less than 1% of light duty vehicles today are zero emission vehicles in the two cities. The targets that we have set on the screen here is to get to 70% of new vehicle registrations as zero emission vehicles by 2030, and then 100% electrification of public, private, and shared fleets by 2045. So here's some additional context for this strategy. The focus is first on new vehicle registrations to reduce the burden on low-income drivers. It targets those with the means to purchase new vehicles. We have 100% electrification of the sector, which may not be possible, but we wanted to be ambitious. Working with SMUD, modeling shows that it is technically possible to achieve over 99% electrification by 2045, and therefore the TAC wanted to push for that in this strategy. Special attention has to be given to medium and heavy-duty vehicles to advance technology and ultimately drive down costs to encourage adoption, particularly for small businesses and goods movement. So a highlight of the tactics. One set of those tactics is to expand public charging and hydrogen fueling stations at or near transit stations, mobility and community hubs, and multifamily buildings. Another is to adopt Cal Green Tier 2 standards for the minimum requirements for EV-capable parking spaces. That's in single-family residences to be EV-capable, for non-residential new construction or major alterations where up to 10% of total parking spaces could be made EV-capable, and in multifamily developments for up to 20%. And then a third category to encourage adoption, to encourage that through incentives and subsidies for the conversion of public and private fleets. And then to expand zero-emission vehicle car share programs, for example, our community car share program. The other set of tactics are to discourage internal combustion engine single occupancy vehicle trips. And so some bold ideas within the tactics are to implement congestion pricing through a phased approach and to adopt and enforce anti-idling policies. So why is this an important strategy to helping us to achieve carbon zero out of the mobility sector? Again, it's third in the loading order, in part because we're ultimately trying to get more efficient travel and lower carbon travel in total. But we know and recognize that there will be people who will drive, either have to drive or just choose to drive. And so if that is the case, it should be zero emission vehicles.
Great. So just in closing, and we'll get to the comments, putting it all together, we really want to create a walkable, safe, and vibrant communities with a multitude of accessible and affordable mobility options for all. We want to make West Sacramento and the city of Sacramento innovation hubs that are attracting innovation and attracting companies in this sector. And we should work together on our vision in a manner that prioritizes social equity and demonstrates what equitable mobility solutions look like on the ground, which includes establishing relationships with community members through grassroots, through trusted grassroots partners, and working with those communities to implement those solutions on workforce development and transitions. So the Mobility TAC encourages the Commission to adopt these strategies. We took this this goal of carbon zero by 2045 very seriously, and I know it's going to be challenging to be there, but we have to be bold. Recognizing that people need to live and thrive, and these strategies intend to bring on online affordable and sustainable transportation options that increase people's mobility. And we also want to recognize this is a dynamic field, and that the public and private sector will need to remain flexible as new innovations and technologies such as AVs come online. But as we're stayed committed to sharing our vision for the region of reaching these goals. So I want to thank the commissioners and turn it back over to you, Ann.
Great. It's a great presentation. Thank you. If you guys could stay up here, we're going to hear from Jacque, and then we'll take questions. Jacque?
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
So again, the comments that I'm going to share have already been incorporated into the recommendations, but just a little overview of the conversation that we had at the Equity Roundtable. So for active transportation, what we were focusing on primarily was neighborhood cleanup and safety. So some of the things that were expressed is that in a lot of the underserved communities, there isn't a regular street cleaning. There's a lot of broken glass, illegal dumping, and things that generally prevent communities from wanting to participate in active transportation. And in terms of safety, in addition to a lack of lighting, the visibility of the active transportation options are not highlighted. For the transit and shared mobility section, there was a recommendation for increased resources for transit rather than single occupancy vehicles, and trying to figure out how we prioritize that. Affordability of public transit, as was indicated, discounts are available for seniors and folks with disabilities. Also the pilot program for youth, but taking into consideration discounts for low-income riders as well. And actually, I mean, seeing the level of participation that you get when you reduce that barrier, that cost, just with the students, 40%, that's impressive. So if we're looking for shifts in behavior and cultural norms, that's a wonderful incentive. Additionally, more bus stops, especially in low-income communities, and making sure that those bus stops are informed by those community members, gathering feedback on particular hotspots where those bus stops are located, and then highlighting the benefits for public health and the environment, and also creating more options for e-bikes. So I saw in the slides that were provided, cargo bikes. Some folks, some of the senior population that contributed as well identified that the bikes that are available aren't suitable for them. Moving into the zero emission vehicles, increasing the supply in general. And it was two of our youth that actually led this conversation about breaking the social stigma of single occupancy vehicles as a marker of success, transportation modes as an option rather than an indication of social status. So making sure that we are figuring out how to reduce the number of cars on the road as we're introducing zero emission vehicles. That is all.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, clarifying questions, then we'll have public comment. Anybody? Yes. Alberto, then Robert?
I think this falls into a clarifying question, but you can tell me if you want to defer it until discussion. Casey, on the first strategy and the second one, I have full confidence that we are going to be totally successful. So you are going to get to promote some really good active transportation, transit related options. I would imagine that these go above and beyond your adopted sustainable community strategy and the 19% target that Mr. Corliss pointed to earlier. So the clarifying question to you is this: can you count these? Do they have value in the SCS currency when we get there?
That is an excellent question. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
They do go above and beyond. We may be able to count them. The SCS, as you're referring to that, right now, for the entire region, we have to create a plan that is, in the state framework, ambitious and achievable. And so there is a tension between trying to set the ambitious target and then also recognize the realities of funding and perhaps past behavior. And so what these represent is really a turning point, that if this can have traction, then we can actually begin to, in future updates of this plan, reflect those trends in that. Right now, I'd say this is kind of a critical turning point. And I also would be remiss if I did not ask if my executive director wants to comment on that.
I've learned to do what Casey tells me to do, so I'm in complete agreement. Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point, Alberto, right? And it gets a little bit to my harping on kind of implementation, and we've talked a lot about this, but we can't have plans and show no change from month to month and year to year. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to get something in right now, because we're looking for an adoption of our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, SCS, at the end of November, as you know, which has a lot of very supporting strategies in it. But yes, this goes further. But certainly, as we go forward, it's going to really help if we can show and demonstrate change in policy, change in infrastructure funding, change in investments and priorities, and thus change in shift in terms of how people are getting around.
And maybe just one final point for my fellow commissioners. I'm so excited about the recommendations you brought forward, and we'll get into some questions later, but this to me is a perfect example of how this commission can really move the needle and push and be at the cutting edge of policy, because you're absolutely right, James. If it doesn't count for the current SES, so what? But there's going to be a future SES. There's going to be maybe a rewrite of SB 375. But the fact that we're actually implementing on the ground these solutions that are really going to change the paradigm, and thanks to this commission, because if it wasn't for the commission, we wouldn't be talking about this. So I think this is just one very tangible example of some of the really important things that we can do in our little part of the universe to really move the state in the right direction.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Nelson.
My question is about the reverse pyramid that you have and the strategies. Is there any correlation in carbon reduction based upon those three different strategies? I'm wondering, in other words, whether or not it really is a reverse strategy. I understand why it exists there for us visually, but I'm not certain that when we launch this, that's the way we want to actually explain things to people, because it's not going to work that way. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question and observation. The way that the TAC discussed this, and I will also, Chris, jump in. The mode shares and what we were trying to put emphasis on as far as the policy changes, investment changes, it was discussed in that order, but that doesn't mean, one, that they would happen sequentially, right? They would have to happen, deployed as needed in order to happen. And two, there's a question of how much it would cost. And I think we actually have in background materials how much that would cost as well. And then the correlation to emissions, I think it's a good question.
I'll just add that single occupancy vehicles are the predominant emission source for the transportation sector. So we wanted to try to create incentives and disincentives to try to get people to change that behavior and get out and think differently about, hey, I'm going to walk, it's only half a mile. Should I walk that as opposed to driving it and trying to think of it differently?
Good. Commissioner Morton.
Thank you. Chris, for you guys, and kind of goes to 2 points you've heard, one about hitting tangible targets and also dealing with things in our little corner of the universe. It made me think about how people are driving through on the way to Napa, on their way to Tahoe, down the 5. So when you guys were looking at the emissions that are around in our area, was there any breakout of that kind of pass-through target? So then when we're looking at targets, we have a realistic number on what we should actually be, dealing with or kind of responsible for?
The emissions that we were charged with looking at are those that are generated within the two cities. So if you recall back to the second slide, those are the emissions coming from the two cities. Now, there are emissions from pass-through traffic, and so those certainly need to be captured. That wasn't, the extent to which other travel was captured was when it, I think it's in the second strategy where it's discussed, one of the tactics is about in commuting or in travel into the two cities because they are, regional job centers in particular. So there is a tactic about that. I'm going to point back to the sustainable community strategy that is moving forward to the SACOG board for adoption. One of the actions in that plan is to design and develop a pilot for mileage-based pricing. And so that would, in fact, influence travel behavior, not just within the region, but passing through the region.
And just to build up a little bit, we recognizing that there's a bigger mega region here that's growing with employment. One of the tactics in the active or the transit shared mobility is collaborate with Capital Corridor to try to figure out how we can get that fully electrified and zero emission. And then for kind of that regional travel, there's a tactic to kind of a package of incentives, disincentives to try to change that behavior. So if the city wanted to look at tolling for some of those that are coming through to go to Tahoe or certain kind of solutions that way.
Okay, great. Commissioner Lichtman.
You may have covered this in the tactics that I didn't read altogether, but I live in Midtown and I've got jump bikes and gig cars and I can walk and I can take the bus. But people who live, say, in the Pocket or other areas don't have those luxuries. And I'm just wondering whether you're prioritizing some of those other areas that, because there are so many benefits that we get. And I just also want to say that this is fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think with the help of the Equitable Roundtable, we've improved some of the language to make sure we're thinking about those and putting them in first, prioritizing under resource communities. I think it is included through it.
Okay, any other clarification questions? All right, great, thanks. Those are all great questions. Okay, I've got 5 requests. Are there any more, Helena? Okay, first is Dan Allison, then Hal Thomas, and then Steve Cohn. And if you could state your organization as well, if there is one, thank you.
Dan Allison, resident of Sacramento, not speaking for an organization. The triangle is great. I think it's a great way of communicating that priorities have changed, and I would like to see that triangle stay. Overall, I really like the recommendations. I like the realization that electrification and autonomy are not going to save us in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. There's a mythology out there that they will. They won't. They're just part of the puzzle. I want to specifically address the funding table. For Sac City, I do not know very much about West Sacramento and Yolo County, so this is addressing City of Sacramento and Sacramento County. For active transportation, the city has been getting by on grants and resurfacing projects. The city needs to invest more to make active transportation viable and safe. They need to put up their own money and not just be waiting for money to come in from other places. For the transit and shared, the county has underinvested in transit for years, and in order to accomplish what we want to with transit, that's going to have to change. It shows a $3 sign cost for transit, and presumably that's not coming from the municipal because that's only a single dollar sign. I believe the city needs to invest more in transit, And it also needs to provide stronger leadership so that on a county basis, more money is going to transit and less to roadway expansion, which is where it's been going in the past. And I recognize that some areas are going to need more transit investment and not so much active transportation investment because of the existing nature of their built environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold Thomas?
The sword of Damocles is above us there, above your head. It's hard to see the public comment. Each word you say takes away a second. Achievability, okay. The electrification of cars has some on-the-ground problems that most of us probably wouldn't know about unless you actually went in and tried to get an electric charger. I did that last month, went into the city. There is no encroachment permit. You cannot get a city permit to put an electric charger in the parkway. So therefore, if you don't have a driveway, you can't have a charger without an encroachment. So the alternative was suggested is put an electric line across the sidewalk. Well, that isn't going to happen, so we're not going to do that. Secondly, there's a SMUD problem. Rooftop solar is capped at existing historic use. So if you're going to buy an electric car and fuel it with panels on your roof, you can't, because you have to size your system to historic use. And if you've been a good citizen and had a lot of LED light bulbs, you have very low historic use. So SMUD has a program to make sure a cap. So if we have these goals and we're going to rely on going to SMUD for our power and we want to have rooftop solar, it isn't going to happen. Okay. One additional point on achievability. We have a density in Sacramento of about 5,000 people per square mile. Davis is larger, actually, 6,000 people per square mile. San Francisco's 18,000. Active transportation will not occur in cities that have low densities when you have long distances between where you live and where you shop. I was in Vincennes, France a week ago. 68,000 people per square mile. It's a vibrant city. Everybody's walking. The markets work. We need to recognize active transportation is limited by our density. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Cohen?
Well, good evening, commissioners, and thank you for your service to our great community. My name is Steve Cohn. I'm chair of a Sacramento Regional Rail Working Group and also chair of a new organization, advocacy group called SMART. Real original, I know, but it's advocating for rail and transit. I want to thank your support staff, particularly Casey and Chris Flores and Julia Kim for their work on the mobility tech. I strongly support the tax recommendations. I believe most of us gathered here understand that there's a great and urgent need to change our transportation infrastructure and our practices if we're going to make a dent in our climate change goals or sustainability goals. The difficulty is getting from here to there. And as you note, the goals are quite ambitious, 40% share for active transportation, 50% for transit. We do recommend a number of ways to get there, but tactic number one under transit and true for active modes as well is more money. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a major funding measure potentially on our ballot next year that will probably be voted on before you all finalize this report. So the reason I mention that is that there are many of us who will nonetheless be taking the ideas, the recommendations from this group and putting that forward so it can have a place in the discussion about STA, Measure A, B, whatever it's called. and the importance of tying transportation funding to the mode shares in the future that we want to see, not tying it to our past or existing shares. So I invite all of you as individuals to help out in that, and I know there will be a lot of us that will take that message to our elected leaders. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Perhaps not everyone knows here that Mr. Cohn used to serve on the Sacramento City Council. So
for a few years.
For a few years. Thank you for being here, and thank you for serving on the mobility TAC.
And they had a hard time keeping me to 2 minutes.
That bell is the same bell that goes off in yoga class.
Very relaxing. Feel very centered.
Yeah. Okay, Chris Brown. And after Chris, Jorge Santana and Michael McCormick.
Clock is already down a second before I even start.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
Thank you all for having me this evening, and appreciate the hard work that the TAC went into and the progress we're making. It seems we are finally speeding things up, but not quite fast enough, as my usual comment is. The climate is changing faster than we were anticipated when this process started, and we need that kind of resiliency moving forward. As for these goals, they're great. I have a couple minor suggestions, but they are amendments. For example, within each walkable area, there should be groceries. There should be things like a library of things and a place where you can have a fix-it cafe so that people don't need to get in a vehicle to go somewhere. That means the city's acquiring a building within each of these areas and providing that resource. So I suggest you amend the active transportation to include walkable sources of those things that are essential needs. Shared mobility, we need actual rideshare apps, not what we have that are imitation taxi cab apps, but things that neighbors could use to look and see, hey, is anybody going to one of those stores I need to go to in my neighborhood who would be willing to get in a car with me together today because we both need to get there. So having apps, that would be an amendment to the transit and shared mobility. And as for your last one, lots of great ideas. I love the 100% goal, but let's put an EV charger at every telephone pole in town, and then we won't have the problem that was described earlier about needing to have it in your driveway. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Professor Santana?
Yes, good evening. I'm Professor Jorge Santana, and I taught 37 years at Sac State. I was editor of a Spanish literary criticism journal for 20 years. And upon my retirement, I decided to try to continue my legacy as an educator by writing a graphic novel. And this graphic novel is called Tesla Man Fights Dirty. And here dirty refers to pollution and garbage and everything that you can think of. But of course, 5.5 years ago when I started this project, I thought this would be a legacy for my children, my grandchildren. And immediately people think Tesla refers to the motor company, but it's not. It refers to Nikola Tesla. And of course, Sacramento has a Tesla musical group, so Tesla Motors is not the inventor of the word. Anyway, my purpose for coming up with this comic book is, of course, to raise awareness on climate change. And of course, I'm hoping maybe Sacramento can adopt Tesla Man as the mascot. I think they need a little pizzazz here. And Sacramento figures quite prominently in the comic book. You can see the Sacramento map, the bridge here that unites both Sacramento City and West Sacramento. And the important thing is that this comic book, if you turn it around, it's in Spanish. And this is a section that you need to also be addressing, and I think you are addressing. And I commend the Commission for reaching out with the high school summit. I think with Greta Thunberg and her movement, this is very timely. So anyway, I hope this becomes something that the commission will consider in the future. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Kate whispered in my ear, we could use a superhero for sure.
Can I donate a copy to you?
That would be lovely, thank you. We'll pass it around. Thank you, sir. Michael McCormick? And I only just now, Michael, saw your written comment, so I'll just let people know that Michael supported the land use recommendations, and thank you for your work on that. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your time you've been spending on this. It's been really meaningful. I've been in some of the subcommittee conversations, and those discussions are deep and meaningful, and a lot of time was spent on these recommendations. From the Land Use Technical Advisory Committee perspective, I would just like to highlight that one of our concerns was an incompatibility potential with the recommendations that might come out of the mobility subgroup. And I got to tell you, that's not the case. I'm really excited to see this. It means that the land use recommendations and the mobility recommendations can work really well together to reinforce deep decarbonization, and I think that's really important. Also, just want to highlight the importance of a strong regional collaboration. Governance is important, regional agencies are important, but also a looser collaborative. So I think about the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative and the potential of that looser collaboration across NGOs, civil society, business, and our government agencies, both at the state, regional, and local level. So I'm going to leave it there. I just want to highlight that I think the technical advisory committees are doing a fantastic job. And with all of your hard work in between these meetings, it really makes these meetings important because they're bringing together a broad diversity of perspectives in a very clear sort of way. So thank you again.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public who wishes to speak on the mobility strategies?
I had put in a speaker slip. I had both things on one page.
Oh, okay. Come on up, Karen.
And I will be quick. Karen Jacque. First thing on mobility, part of the active mobility strategy, and by the way, I think it was a great overview and great approach to mobility, and I support it. A very important part of that infrastructure is trees, and I'll be very interested in seeing that that those be included, because you can't walk on our boiling hot days unless you have the trees, and they also provide all kinds of other climate benefits. The other thing I wanted to do was just piggyback on what Steve Cohn had said, that there is this process going on with STA developing a measure that will potentially go on the ballot. And I'm very, very worried that that will include too much money for sprawling roads and new road construction and widening, and too little money for transit. And our transit, they work very hard with the resources they have, and they are really, really starved in terms of having enough resources to have the rapid, convenient kind of transit that we need for people to have alternatives. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all the work that the TACs have done.
Thanks. And as Kate mentioned earlier, next month when we hear from the Public Health and Community Resiliency TAC, one of their focuses is urban greening, and we'll be hearing more about the tree canopy then. Okay, then I think we'll open it up to the commission. I want to say thank you to all three of you. Casey and Chris, fantastic presentation. I think you guys should take that on the road. I love the slides that roll along. It's a very powerful way of bringing life to the strategies. And I thought it was really helpful that you included the baseline information on each of the strategies, because it's hard when you just look at the milestones to know if they're ambitious, but when you hear the baseline information, that really comes across. So thank you. And Jackie, thank you. I think, I know I'm feeling more comfortable, and I think everybody is, that we're really getting the process more down now, and getting that equity input as we go. So thank you.
And if I could just take one moment to circle back to Commissioner Ayala's comment earlier about community engagement fatigue. Transportation, as we've seen, is real hot right now. And a lot of the agencies that are working to address that aren't doing so collaboratively. So community engagement fatigue as we move forward is something that we really need to take into consideration and how we might be able to work together to go out to those communities. And also that we would like to utilize the Environmental Justice Working Group to facilitate some community engagement opportunities that come out of this commission. So we want to make sure that we're getting all of this information in front of the appropriate audiences as well. So thank you.
Great, thanks. And I know you needed to leave by 6, so I think you're right on schedule. You're right on schedule. Thank you. Okay, feedback or reactions from the commission. April.
All right. I can't quite get myself.
Oh, there you go.
Oh. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm April Wick, Resources for Independent Living, Climate Change Commissioner. I just wanted to thank the co-chairs, Casey and Chris, and I also wanted to thank all of the participants. I support the recommendations, and I just wanted to say that unless you were there, I had the opportunity to participate both on and offline in several of the mobility TAC conversations way from the very beginning up until the arc of where we got to where we are today. And just the changes are so profound that it's really hard to articulate. And I think that it's a testament to the professionalism and the commitment to this topic that everyone had. I know that we had a really diverse group of stakeholders that were in the room, and we had a lot of really fierce, difficult conversations where a lot of people, were able to say that they didn't see themselves reflected in the initial set of recommendations that were coming out of the tax, and everyone had their own, their own ideas of how to. We all had our own. The goal was the same, but some of us had different ways of getting there. But we all were able to come together and create what you see before you. And I think that this product really did address the fact that when we were initially talking about the recommendations, it was very technical, and a lot of people were saying, like, wait, let's hold on. We're not seeing the community reflected at all. We need to address equity. And I'm just really proud of how everyone was able to kind of, in a lot of ways, a lot of us had to put our egos aside and really had to make compromises and had to make hard choices and just what I'm calling really fierce conversations. And it was really beautiful to see. And I hope that we carry that spirit into the implementation tactics. I know one of the things I've always been really open about as a commissioner is that we're voting on these really high level impactful strategies and being bold, and I think that's what this is doing here, so I support these. But it's only going to be as good as the commitment to the community engagement and being able to move forward with the implementation tactics, and I know that that's easier said than done. So I just want to thank everyone for their hard work and say that I support the recommendations, and it's just really hard for me to articulate just how far we came, and I wish that we could do a Netflix series about the mobility TAC, because I wish somebody had a camera, because it's like, if you want to see what it's like to have community engagement and go from where it was to where it is now, and all the conversations that needed to be had between scientists and social justice people and roads people and bike people and all the stereotypes and silos we put ourselves in, but we were able to come up with this was pretty beautiful to see. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for your comment. I feel like someone needs to do a case study on that. But Naila, did you have your hand up? Yeah, and then Meg.
So I just wanted to say, I want to thank everybody who put in hard work making these recommendations. I just want to say I don't want this to be a wasted opportunity. When we talk about really doing the community-led study on what is stopping first mile, last mile, this is a great opportunity to really look at dumping in our neighborhoods, beautification in our neighborhoods, like Karen said, shade and the heat table. And let's not use this as a wasted opportunity to really address some of those first mile, last mile issues and not just talk about sidewalks.
Thank you. Good comment. Yeah, Meg, then Robert.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really moves. Come over.
I don't really have a microphone of my own. So thank you for yours.
I was also able to participate in the work of the Mobility TAC and appreciate your leadership and the robustness of the conversations that we were able to have. Very pleased to support the 3 strategies that we ended up with. And also pleased that another set of really important conversations in the context of all of this work have begun with the business roundtables that our chair mentioned at the beginning of today's meeting. The businesses in our communities are our employers, and they are the strength and the health of the economy that we all rely on and need here. And, so I am pleased at the fact that we are holding these business roundtable conversations. I'm really pleased at those who are choosing to participate in them and to contribute constructively and with sincerity about the context, both of the strategies and of some of the implementation tactics, and the interplay that's going to be needed between incentive-based work and mandate-focused work. So I just wanted to make that remark.
Great, thanks, Meg. Robert?
I had the chance today to share the recommendations with a group of students on campus. Students who are disadvantaged and really having a rough time. And so to hear them react, I thought, taught me 2 lessons today. First, the word disincentive really, really affected them deeply. They thought punishment, and they thought it was coming after them. And they thought when they heard about it, and one kid said, well, I have a 2002 Honda, and I'm going to keep it until at least 2045, okay? Are you going to take my Honda away? So I think there's something to think about that word and how it plays. The other thing is that I thought, after listening to them, that we should begin each one of these strategies, each one with that we need an education strategy. Because we can come out with these recommendations, and without an education strategy, they won't mean anything. And so I would suggest that we think seriously when we finalize what we're doing about what the education strategies will be on each and every one of the tactics, so people can understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you. I know that when we do our final work and the TAC leads get together and talk about the structural recommendations, that there will be an overarching recommendation around education, among other things, and it is critical. On your first point, is it a formal group of students where we could have like a point of contact that we could include in our youth outreach?
I don't want to identify what group of students it was because
That's okay.
It was special. Yeah. But I think that, no, I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
It's just important to remember that words matter a lot.
Right.
Diagrams matter a lot. And you want to think in their eyes, because we, in the 60s, not very many of you are from the 60s, but we used to always ask, where are you coming from? And I think you still have to ask the question, where are you coming from?
Okay, well, I think we could ask the TAC to take a look at that language. Okay, I've got Kaim and then Alberto. Or, sorry, was there dueling hands?
Thank you, fellow commissioner. This is actually a good segue because, and I want to bring, if she doesn't mind, Ms. Lassonde back up, because I have a question for you. So let me make a couple comments. You made the point about the 100% target is going to be a heavy lift. And what I want to raise an appreciation for is not only the commission, but the audience, is the great opportunity we have because in our two little cities, again, we're not necessarily bound to operate in a vacuum. And what I mean by that, of course, you are well aware of, many of us are well aware of, that at the state level, there has been legislation in recent time that has sought to limit combustion vehicles. It's been floated in the past, and I don't put it past our state leaders to bring it back, particularly in the context of some of the craziness that is going on with the federal government and the rollback of many of the environmental protections that many of us worked on for many years. So I'm certainly not advocating at the moment a position for this commission, but I think it's just an indication of, again, the opportunity we have, because to the extent that this is something important for us, there is a role for us to play at the state capitol. And this relates to the first tactic in the previous TAC discussion we had. So I just wanted to make that point. But my question for you is also, as President Nelson alluded to, about disincentives. And it's interesting because I had a different take on it. I've been in this space for many years, working on clean transportation policy, and this is probably the first time that I can remember, if I've ever seen it, where a policy statement includes the word disincentive. And the way I read that is, I don't think that we've done a good enough job as a society to quantify the damage that we're making to the environment from the externalities of us making the choice to rely on fossil fuels. So to me, the disincentive is really important because it's about the carrots and the sticks. And point well taken, we can design the implementation of something like this that goes through the equity lens first and foremost, so that we don't disadvantage not only students, but just people that are not like us that can probably afford different choices. But my question for you is, I know you hinted to what disincentives meant. I wanted to bring you back up and see if you can expand on some of the things that you and your friends at SACOG are thinking about to change the paradigm of the single occupant vehicle use challenge that we all have.
Sure. So I mentioned it in some of the Q&A, but the mileage pricing pilot that we are hoping to, just applied for a grant with a lot of partners, hoping to be able to design that. The idea of pricing, that charging for transportation based on the mileage driven versus a tax at the gas pump is something that the SACOG board has been looking at, in part because at some point there's a bigger issue of how do we pay for transportation in a way that's not via the gas tax, because that is not keeping up. It is actually declining. And so that's one of the reasons. But it also, mileage-based pricing is also a way of charging for the cost of using the roadway. Right now, we don't have a charge. Congestion, you could say, like this time you spend in traffic is in some ways that fee on personal time, but there isn't that right now. Another form of that is looking at tolling, high occupancy toll lanes. Those are in many other parts of the country. This is the only region that doesn't have that. And so that is something that, that Caltrans is actually looking at right now. And so we are looking to partner with them to look at that moving into the future as well. More locally, because a lot of that really has to do with freeways and crossing across the region. More locally, and this is in some of the implementation tactics here, is parking. Unbundling parking from the cost of, an apartment, of actually charging for parking at a more market rate price than is currently done. The thing that I want to make sure that we understand is when the word disincentive is used, it is not intended to be used by itself. It absolutely shouldn't. So the idea of incentives and subsidies are actually really important, back to the lens of equity and innovation and reaching carbon zero, that subsidies and incentives are a really important part of that. Because we need to, it costs a lot to do something new, especially if you don't have the money to do it in the first place. And it also, just incentives to get people to try something different is also really critical. So I appreciate hearing this conversation. I think it's also just important to know that those things can't happen by themselves. They're a package deal.
And Commissioner Ayala, I'd just add on to that. Casey's mentioning this grant that we just put in with actually 2 other regions in California to look at sort of various pricing schemes. I mean, it's not unlike SMUD's time of day rates that they've just rolled out, right? But what is actually, I think, really exciting is, this gets maybe back to the disincentive incentive, is what are the kinds of financial incentives we could offer people to actually not drive alone? What's the flip side of that? Because I think I said that the last commission meeting, I've been in transportation a long time, all we seem to talk about is supply. We just build it and they'll come. We put more stuff out there and we will change behavior. And we have to begin a conversation, which I think we're doing here at the commission. That is not enough.
Thank you. Kaim?
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank Commissioner Arnold for her comments, and those of you who were able to join us at the Metro Chamber for the first of the business roundtables. We look forward to continuing those, and hopefully continuing those as we get into the discussion of how we're going to implement and do the tactics, because for us is the kind of 4 points that the chamber believes in terms of strong business, connected region, ready workforce, and this one really kind of goes to vibrant community, which for us is about business retention, talent retention. So, in that, I'm really looking forward to the financing discussion, because as we talked about some of these strategies and get to the tactics, one of the things that kind of concerns me, and I know you guys heard this during the roundtable, is that when people started making investments in infrastructure and equipment, particularly when they're transporting freight goods to and from stores or restaurants, it's not a 2-3 year commitment. So we need to make sure that if folks are making that 10-20 year commitment, that not only are the vehicles available, but that if they've got them already and they still have a longer time out, that we're going to provide them enough of an incentive. And this also kind of goes back to us reaching more out to the capital in our backyard here and having them pull down more dollars, for those things.
And I think that was the idea of referring to new vehicle registrations, both for the issue of the 2002 Honda, right? And also for investments moving forward.
And I think we've talked a lot here at these meetings about when we get to implementation, the importance of outreach to neighborhoods and communities. And maybe we haven't talked enough about the same applying to our businesses in Sacramento. And that as we recommend to the city these strategies and submit the tactics, that it's important to make sure that the city, and I'm sure they know, but that it's important for them before implementing to do that reach out and engagement. Okay. Next. You'll go. Okay.
So first of all, thanks to the TAC, and I'm supportive of the 3 strategies. And just thank you for all the really good work. And it sounded like it was an adventure to get through it all, but that's the way it should be, right? And my comments are really, and I'm glad, I want to hit on a couple of points and about, first of all, around the scope of this. Because first, all 3 of the strategies, there's a tremendous opportunity to sort of marry these back, and I'm glad we're going to do it as part of the process, to the land use. Because I think you were just saying you can't have one without the other. And it's going to be vitally important for us to, and I think about I'm just applying everything right away 5 steps down around, or maybe 50 steps down, about how this interacts with what we have in our communities. And how do you plan it for VMT reductions, which we're shooting for now. We adopted that, or in the city we'll look at that. And then take the transit and mobility pieces as a way to interact with that piece to help achieve those. So I'm also chair of the YCTD board, and so it will be vitally important that we get those agencies in place. And the other part of the scope is understanding that this shouldn't be aimed at just, it feels like everything's today is just me. Steve's not here today. Aimed at us as what is the city going to do? This has to go back, I told you this earlier, this is going back a little, Henry's not here, so it's going to you, Chris. And it's going back to me as a YCTD, because the one area that's not on your, I'm 100% supportive, especially on the transit one. But the one thing you're missing as the incentive is it's got to be better. It's got to be, and I'm going to bring up my experience from Saturday. I wrote there, and Laura, you were there, and we were listening some kids talk about transportation and transit. And one table, a young woman and her peers around the table were talking about how they're not allowed to walk to the bus stop and be there anymore. It's not safe, or it's not well lit, or they're afraid of being on the bus. And we talked about this a little bit this morning about the perception of it's not safe. We can't just say we're going to go do these things and hold ourselves, the city, accountable. We've got to listen, and we're starting that process at YCTD and looking at everything sort of on the table about how to be better, and so that's our neck of the woods. So again, from scope, we've got to apply this back and take this back to these other agencies and say, how will you help adopt these? And I think that's something that we need to think about in every institution. And I agree with you 100% around the business community. We can't do this on our own. This is a partnership, so I know you put that in your implementation. We have to hold them accountable to be good partners. So again, just a point I wanted to make. And then, and so with that, I'm sort of asking to add, I know it's not, we're adopting the strategies, not the implementation tactics, is we need to have quality in there. We need to have quality service and frequency and all those sort of policy decisions transportation districts and mobility need to have. They need to be looking at those, and we should be advocating them for those. I'm glad you brought up the disincentive piece, because I was thinking on the back of my mind, I'm not afraid of that word. I hear the sensitivities to it, but parking was the one I was thinking about, how our whole bridge district is underparked purposefully. And we are dependent upon, as a land use, that was our choice. We got to get the density right, and we got to get the transit, which is why I'm glad I see former Councilmember Cohn here, because we worked on streetcar together, and now it's going to be whatever's going to be next. But that's it. We were dependent on, we made ourselves, necessity is the mother of all invention. We just said we're going to put ourselves on the hook, that we have to figure out a way to get these things done. And that whole line, if we can get that working, would serve not just the bridge district, but a whole line of residents in our Bright and Broderick neighborhoods that address some of the equity issues. So it's really super important that we have that lens and think about it that way. The last piece I want to bring up is around the last piece around the zero emissions. And this is where we're going to need a little help from our commission members and around, because, and I said this about the land use one, electrification in general. And I'm for this moving forward. We happen to have, and I see she left, we had a fuel cell partnership in our neighborhood. And I saw they got into the tactics as something to consider as zero emission. We just don't have the same partnership when it comes to electrification that you're all speaking of how to move forward with this type of strategy. And it's not an excuse, it's just an is that we have to figure out the deal with. And our council brought up last Wednesday joining the Valley Clean Air Administration to start looking at options. So this is going to be an active part of our conversation to have the right partnership in this city we sit in today to achieve a lot of these goals. And I think that's where I'm going to ask, and this commission really, and I'll figure out a way to bring this back into that issue, is how does this commission help West Sacramento, Gila County Transportation, everything else that's going to be dependent upon PG&E going forward. If it's not them, then what other options do we have? Mm-hmm. So it's a huge, huge issue for us, and not just from the partnership for incentives and as limitations we have that you talk about with maybe SMUD is, somebody brought that up earlier. It's, as Mike would tell you and other businesses in our neighborhood tell you, crossing the river, a business is already, and residents already 30% higher in their energy rates here than there. And it's as basic as that. And so going to electric and not having incentives to help implement this is a huge disadvantage for us. So I just want to bring that to attention and to the commission. It's something I'm going to look to your help with. And so those are my comments. Thank you all for your work. This is great.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or feedback? April?
Oh, I wanted to make the motion. Are you going to call the motion, or can I do it?
Perfect timing. Yep.
I motion that the Climate Change Commission accept the high-level strategies brought forward from the mobility TAC.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second.
James, thank you. Okay, any other discussion before we vote? All right, all those in favor, raise your hand. Opposition or abstentions? Great. So unanimous vote to move the mobility strategies forward. Congratulations to both of you. Good job.
I do just want to say a huge thank you to Chris and Casey just for your work on this, your presentation tonight. It's really nice, April, to hear your experience through this. I know there was a lot of work, and I also just appreciate, coming to the commission prior, getting feedback from us, going back, getting a lot of the other community feedback. I know that's a lot of work, but it's much, much appreciated. And I just think it shows in the tightness of the presentation you gave tonight and its salience. Very nice job.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you. Great. Before we move on, a couple of folks commented about the Measure A funds, expenditures. And so I wanted to let you know that next Tuesday, the Sacramento City Council, instead of their regular meeting, is holding a special workshop next Tuesday at 5 o'clock to talk about the Sacramento Transit Authority, which was created under Measure A, and how those funds should or could be expended. So I'm sure public participation would be welcome. Let's see, what are we doing now? Public comment.
Yeah, the general comments.
Great, thank you. Helena, are there any other, okay, great. So we have two public comments on other topics, Professor Santana and then Chris Brown. Did you wish to speak again? Okay, thank you. Is Chris still here?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thank you all very much. Just to reiterate what our next steps are, the Community Health and Resiliency TAC will continue its meeting with the support of the equity group. And at our next meeting, we will hear those recommendations. And as Kate mentioned, we're also having two speakers at that meeting to give us some further education around equity and how it fits in. We'll be continuing to convene the equity roundtable, the business roundtables, and we'll be launching the finance TAC. Our next meeting is December 2nd at 4 o'clock at SACOG. Thank you. And we are in the process of scheduling the commission's final 3 meetings. I think a doodle poll will be going out shortly after this meeting. We have a couple of minutes, so I don't get to do this because we never end on time. I guess I would just ask if the commissioners have any general feedback or input, and you don't have to. It's just we don't often have time to do this. April.
I'll be really brief. I just also wanted to thank Kate and her team, because similar to the comments that I made earlier about, having to change course and people being, mature enough and bold enough and professional enough, I really want to thank Kate for your professionalism and your team's professionalism, Helena and Julia, and the fact that, all that goes into the doodle polling and the keeping things on task and sometimes even when there were times when you had to very gently and politely, not just you, but your team had to gently and politely, remind us about why we're all here, and also had to sort of figure out how to get some of our word vomit into ways that you knew things could be voted on. So I just wanted to thank you for that as well. And I think just what this whole process has really taught me, something I forgot to mention in my earlier remarks, was I really learned that, we're all more alike than we are different. And that is something that really I took from participating in the mobility tax, that we're more alike than we are different. And I also want to say, I remember sitting at Starbucks with Casey in one of our sort of one-on-one conversations after we kind of started talking about equity. And I remember you saying just really, really professionally, like, thank you so much for upending this process. And I'm sure you just wanted to go home and just be like, I'm just going to like eat Cheetos and just watch Netflix. But you didn't show that at all. So I just wanted to say that.
Nice. Thank you. I think it's safe to say that this initiative has turned out to be a lot bigger than any of us expected, but well worth it. Okay, I thank you all. Thank you for your passion and being here and all the hard work. And thank you, Kate, and LGC, and Julia, and everybody, presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.